This is the College Football Connection Podcast with Alvin Reed, Bradford Bruns, and Marty Jenkins on 101 ESPN.
Good afternoon and happy 4th of July weekend, St. Louis. Bradford Bruns coming back at you live from our studio in Creve Coeur. It is the 101 ESPN YouTube channel plus 101ESPN.com. Round number 2 of the College Football Connection. Season previews to come pertaining to the SEC on this Independence Day occasion. Hope you're out there enjoying and wrapping up the tail end of your festivities for the holiday weekend. Hey, at least the weather has largely cooperated this time around. That's a good thing. And another good thing, we are going to be spotlighting some pyrotechnics courtesy of the other Columbia, Williams-Brice Stadium. Yes, Mizzou fans, bear with me here because this time around it is all about the South Carolina Gamecocks trying to break through and seal the deal, something that Shane Beamer's team could not quite accomplish a year ago in the other Columbia. So a few days ago, in case you missed it on the YouTube channel on 101ESPN.com, we put the Tennessee Volunteers under the microscope. Another very intriguing team when you're thinking about quarterbacks and really perilous situations at that position. Now, all of a sudden, 1 year removed from its first ever CFP berth, Tennessee with a lot of question marks specifically pertaining to the departure of one Nico Iamaleava. However, the South Carolina faithful, you guys have no reason to worry at that position, or so it would appear. Because even though, as we said, Shane Beamer at the helm of this program trying to guide this team to what would be only the 5th double-digit win campaign in program history, yes, it's been a while since the heroics of one Steve Spurrier from the years 2011 to 2013. You're set at QB, though, because LaNorris Sellers, you heard the name, you recognized the body of work from 2024, especially down the stretch. Need I remind you once more that Week 10 clash in Columbia, South Carolina, that is, the 21-6 lead you build over the University of Missouri-Columbia. And even though it was touch and go down the stretch, the rally in the final minute, literally the final minute, was Sellers orchestrating the drive leading to the game-winning score. 34-30 was the final, and that pushed South Carolina to 7-3. South Carolina, if you recall, at that point was in the midst of what was a 6-game winning streak to conclude the regular season, only to fall, of course, on New Year's Eve down in Orlando. It was an inglorious showing against Brett Bielema's very game Illinois squad, but to lose in that fashion, not exactly the note on which Gamecocks fans wanted to finish what was a really bang-up job throughout 2024. And especially, guys, when you take into consideration the start that this team had, just 3-3, had to do a lot to get itself even into contention, and into contention, it definitely propelled itself. Hey, when you're talking about some heartbreaking losses, really at the wire to the likes of an Alabama, for crying out loud. And you were right there. If only you had been able to be competitive against Ole Miss in your own backyard, we would have been talking about South Carolina last season being a CFP team. What we're talking about, though, right now is we preview the festivities ahead for 2025. I know that Phil Steele came out last week, Marty's guy, and talked about how he believes, in his opinion, he asserted that South Carolina may indeed have the toughest schedule in the entire country. And yeah, it's difficult to quibble with that to an extent. But here's what I'm looking at. When I'm projecting forward and I'm thinking about instrumental pieces of this team, of this program, beyond just the trigger man in LaNorris Sellers, I'm looking at the schedule and I see that you are not encountering this season either of the two top heavyweights in your league. There is no Georgia this year on the schedule. There is no Texas in 2025. So that automatically makes the permutations in the equation here just a little more manageable and a little more tolerable, right, to stomach. But rest assured, make no mistake about it, everything, all of the success that you hope to continue, the momentum you continue to parlay into 2025 and getting yourself into that hallowed territory, it is going to hinge almost entirely on LaNorris Sellers. He threw for a then career-high 5 touchdowns against the Tigers last November, and boy, can we just cannot wait. We cannot really, I know I can't, contain the excitement for that September 20th clash, game number 4 for Mizzou in 2025. But before you get to that point, of course, you have to make mention of what is there on the table for SC leading up to that point. You begin the season, the final day actually of August, the 31st, again, playing in Atlanta against, interesting connection here, Virginia Tech. So Frank Beamer's old program in a neutral site game. Everything, though, pointing in the direction of the Gamecocks being able to move to 3-0 before that critical contest versus MU, albeit on the road, all over again in 2025. Now, you would figure with so much of the acclaim and just what you visualize, see on tape there on the television, Sellers is a one-of-one type of talent. There are the rankings out there, so many different people saying that maybe he could be a dark horse contender for the Heisman Trophy as soon as this season. And it's difficult to quibble with any of that press, any of that spec, because as a redshirt sophomore quarterback, he's only going to improve. I do have some questions about the offensive line, with the exception of the returning starter there at left tackle. But when flushed out of the pocket, even he started to display more and more finesse, more and more touch on those throws as well as 2024 progressed. Yes, in the backfield, you have to replace a very formidable source of production in Rocket Sanders, who did a phenomenal job in that ill-fated result for MU. But if you're telling me that Sellers is your guy, he is in place, and then you're surrounding him with talent, young, raw talent at the receiver position, honestly, it reminds me a lot of what Tennessee is going to have to contend with this coming season. But this is a guy who is capable of elevating the guys around him and elevating the overall, boosting the overall profile of this particular program. Yes, I understand on the other side of the football that you will have to replace as well a ton of production from the defensive line in particular. Kyle Kennard, he's no longer there. He is NFL bound. So Dylan Stewart, guess what? As the lone returning defensive lineman, lone returning member of the front four, it is going to be on your shoulders, young man, to be able to generate more of that outside pressure coming from the edge and getting that push even to some extent up the middle. Linebacking core as well. Not a single starter actually is returning, even in the secondary. I loved what I saw down the stretch, not just at the scouting combine, where this young man was an absolute freak and wowed all of the onlookers. I'm talking about, of course, Nick Eamon-Warry, now of the Seattle Seahawks. You have to fill a couple of voids there at cornerback, safety as well. Now, Kilgore, he is an undeniable talent. Last year, freshman, All-American, All-SEC type of player. Is he going to be the quarterback of that defense and be able to shepherd it along in the early stretch of the schedule and then progressing into October and so forth? Because that is when you may be able to see behind the shoulder here, it does get particularly brutal for the Gamecocks. The good news is that you do host in OU. You do host in Alabama. And then on the flip side, as we move into November, and at that point in time, when you're talking about road contests, they may not be in succession, but you actually have to play at Ole Miss. Seriously? You have to go to Kyle Field at A&M. I know that you handled that squad last season, albeit in your own ballpark. And then at the end of the year, you wrap up the regular season, hopefully with those CFP ambitions, and you take on the classic in-state rival that is Clemson. Last season, it went well on the road, but to seal the deal against a team that is expected to be very, very good and competitive in its own right, can South Carolina have enough victories in total in the bag at that point to move on to the playoff picture? I am astounded that a lot of different outlets out there are setting the over-under figure this year at 7.5, a mere 7.5. This team, guys, last year had 9 regular season victories. Now, you lose a lot of talent, particularly on the defensive side of the football, but do you not think with an additional offseason during which to prepare, to familiarize himself with Beamer's playbook, to basically just gain that much more maturity, that Sellers isn't going to move on and move into that next stratosphere? Yeah, I'm betting on the guy who has the ball in his hands on each and every play, because it's not just about the rocket. It's being able to improvise as well on a whim, on a dime, and when absolutely under duress, displaying that absolutely exemplary poise and an ultra cool demeanor. I saw it down the stretch out of him on entirely too many occasions, and I'm expecting him to do that much more for 2025. So basically, guys, if you're out there, if you're willing to put a little bit of action out there in advance of week number 0 and the tail end of August when all of the regular season action commences, yeah, bet on South Carolina this season, but I am going to kindly stay away from the September 20th proceedings at Memorial Stadium. Bradford Bruns with you here on the College Football Connection, diving into the prospects of one South Carolina for 2025. Hey, the Tigers of Auburn are on the way in the next week or so, and you know down the line we're getting to MU and the rest of the key participants in the SEC. But thank you very much for spending a little bit of time over the holiday weekend with me. We are basically getting ready for a huge Cardinals Cup Series finale as well. Sunday night baseball round 1 and then segueing into a doubleheader. So make sure that you tune in tomorrow morning bright and early over with our friends on 101 ESPN TMA starting at 7. BK and Ferrario 11 to 2, and then the Fastlane crew reunited from 2 to 6. Baseball conversation and maybe just a hint of football. Certainly much more in the weeks to come as we edge closer to the thick of it, only on the College Football Connection. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for listening